Okay, everyone. Good evening. I will now call to order the City of Newberg Budget Committee meeting for April 23rd, 2024. Rachel, will you please conduct a roll call?
Mike McBride,
Here.
Ned Knight, Robin Wheatley,
Here.
Shelley Reimer,
Here.
Stephanie St. Cyr. You are here. Bill Rosacker. And we have Raquel Peregrino de Brito
Here.
and Molly Olson
Here.
and Judy Brown, right?
Here.
Trying to do this by memory. This is fun. Peggy Kilberg.
Here.
And absent is Elise Yarnell Holloman, Derek Carmen, and let's see, Alex Nichols and Theo Ebora. It was all sorts of reasons.
If I will now open the meeting for public comments. Rachel, did we receive any public comments?
There are no comments.
Anyone on site for comments? Okay, I will now close the public comment portion of the meeting and on to city presentations.
All right, welcome back, everybody, for the Budget Committee. Since we have a pretty experienced committee, I wanted to kind of change things up a little bit this year. So I'm not going to do the normal training that we did last year. So this year we wanted to do kind of a more budget overview, what's new with Newberg and what's been going on. And then we wanted to do a financial forecast so you can see what we're up against on some of our funds for the future and just kind of general overview when you are looking at the budget. So I will get into
And don't hide your glory under a bush, because Katie has managed to do a 3-year forecast for the first time in many years.
That's
So
right.
This is pretty cool for this city.
That's right. So we're going to be able to do some looking into the future and see what we've got going on for some of our funds.
I have a question,
Yeah.
procedural question. With most of our committees, the rules say that at the first meeting, we elect the officers. Although Raquel does a great job, do we need to do that for this committee?
I have that saved for the next one, since the next one, we're going to be officially reviewing the budget for that one. So she will be our chair for one last meeting until the election. And then also, if you guys have questions throughout the presentation, just feel free to interrupt or raise your hand. This is pretty back and forth with everybody. See if I can get the clicker to work. No. Oh, there we go. All right. So I wanted to go over just kind of the brief agenda for tonight's meeting. I wanted to go over some new things at Newberg, just for those of you who haven't been keeping up with city council meetings. Some of our spending priorities for the city, some of the position vacancies and FTE changes that we've had throughout the fiscal year. The city council goals that we're tying to the budget. Obviously, we've had a few new ones that we're adding for next year's budget. And then getting into the financial forecast, we have some upcoming issues that I just wanted the committee to be aware of and just things to consider for the future. Some common assumptions that I used across the funds that we're forecasting, and then the actual financial forecast, and then just a general overview of the budget committee. Oh, there we go. The budget committee and just the schedule ahead. There we go. So what's new for Newberg? So I wanted to start us off on some good news. The city is almost fully staffed, which is a really big deal. We've been understaffed for many years, and now Newberg is fully staffed, which is a big deal. We've made a lot of recruitment efforts over the past couple of years. We implemented a tract from NeoGov to try and do some outreach for candidates. And we've also implemented 100% health benefits a couple years ago, which has also been a big draw for new employees. So this is just a really big deal. We have no staffing vacancies. So great news for us. Newberg is now a really attractive place to work. On some not so good news is the City Hall flood. As most of you have heard, City Hall flooded back in January. And we've just been working through the insurance claim process to try and get that back to open. It's probably going to take several more months, as we've talked about before. It'll be a Christmas miracle if we're back in City Hall by December. We're hopeful, but it's just going to be a long process getting the claims and getting everything repaired. We also added a second school resource officer to Newberg School District. So now we have 2 officers that serve the school district. Tourism, thus our TLT revenue, is also booming. As we've heard from Taste Newberg, they've been doing a really awesome job getting in some new ideas and some new things to bring in tourism. And so that is bringing our TLT revenue up. We've been working on a new website, so we're hoping to launch that either the end of this fiscal year or sometime next fiscal year to make things more user-friendly for residents. ARPA projects are finally starting to wrap up. We only have a couple community projects left. And then one of the biggest city projects is the water rights transfer. We're hoping to wrap that up at the end of this fiscal year. It's just taken a long time for that process to go through. And then the sidewalk crew, we're expected to hire that early July. That was in the budget for this fiscal year. And then we ran into some funding issues with our street fund from Elliott Road. So we wanted to give that fund some time to recover a little bit. And so we're still planning on hiring the sidewalk crew next year. So yeah, we're planning on doing some pavement preservation with that. We have bargaining underway for both of our bargaining groups. For NDPDA, that is our police group, we've reached a tentative agreement for a 3-year contract. It went pretty smoothly this year. It was only a couple of meetings and we reached an agreement. So that was really easy to work with. AFSCME, we're still underway with negotiations. So we're hoping to wrap that up hopefully by the end of the fiscal year.
What does AFSCME stand for?
Federal, state, county, municipal employees.
It's a good question. I don't know. But it represents our Public Works Division here. So that would be maintenance, operations, engineering, and our IT department. And then our opioid money is still coming in. So we're working on developing some plans for what we're going to do with the opioid money that's still planning on coming in. We're expected to still receive opioid money for, I think it's like another 15 years. So, you know, we'll see how many other entities continue to join in. We noticed that Walmart was one that joined in. So that's a big entity to start paying out opioid money. So hopefully we'll be seeing some checks coming our way. The rate review committee met and passed rates for the next 2 fiscal years. So you'll see those budgeted in our utility funds. And then the one that I am most excited about, we're considering moving to a biennial budget, which is a 2-year budget cycle. There are a lot of pros for this for the city. One of it is it really frees up a lot of staff time for people. This would allow us to do more policy work and updating things around the city, working on records retention, and then being able to focus on like ad hoc committees and just other things besides doing the budget every year. There would still be a process in that middle year where we would meet with the committee and still go over changes. It's just, we wouldn't have to recreate a whole new budget. So it's something that we wanted to put out there and have the committee think about and ponder. Do you have a comment on that?
Yes, thank you, Katie.
Yeah.
So one of the important things about the idea of a biennial budget cycle is it aligns better with your capital improvement project plans. So if you go to a 2-year budget cycle, a certain piece of pipe or a certain piece of infrastructure is more likely to fall inside of 1-2-year cycle rather than if you follow the budget closely here in the city, you'll see we end up doing a lot of weird adjustments at the end of a year. If a project is still continuing, it gets rid of all of that. So you would spool up a set of projects, they would go out for bid, they would begin, They would typically run for 15 to 18 months, and then they would wrap up within the span of one financial cycle.
Is the sidewalk crew a good example of that instance where because?
It could
of
be
the
if they
year-
take on board a project like that,
Right,
a certain long piece of whatever.
right.
Yeah, and generally you want to start it on an odd year. Because that will help you align with the state's budget, because that will let you know what your PERS rates are going to be for those 2 years. We've also kind of lined it up perfectly because both of our bargaining units were trying to do 3-year contracts. So then if we start it after this next fiscal year, we'll know our cost of living increases for those 2 years in the budget. And then we just completed rate review. So that one is generally a January to December instead of a fiscal year, a July to June. So we're hoping that we can maybe amend that to extend another 6 months so that we can align it with our 2-year budget cycle on that as well. But if not, it kind of gets us pretty close on the next 2-year budget cycle.
One ring to bind them all.
Yeah. So it's looking like a good time to do it, but it's something that we'll be looking into, and wanted to just put that out there. Whoops. Our position vacancies, so this is great news. We really only have one that's posted on our website right now. That's communication officer. And I believe we might actually have somebody in backgrounds for this right now. So we might actually be filling this position very quickly. And that is it, which also, like I've said before, is really incredible. And this just means Newberg is really becoming a great place to work. So kudos to HR and kudos to our staffing here, because we want to keep everybody that we have. I wanted to go over the FTE changes. So from this year to what we have in next year's budget. So this year we've had a few changes. We've had a couple adds and a couple cuts. So we had an add of half-time records management clerical assistant and a half-time court clerk. So previously we had one person who was split between both of these positions. And then when she left the city, we decided to make both of these positions full-time. So we added half-time and half-time to make both of these positions full-time, because we're having the red light cameras that are going to be coming on, and that's going to be more citations for our court to process. So we really needed another full-time court clerk. And then with records management clerical assistants, our city recorder really needed more redundancy in that department. So that really needed another full-time position as well. And then we added 10 hours to our graphic design specialist to make her also a full-time position. And then resulting from that, we cut a full-time admin assistant for the city manager. Sorry, Will. But we just kind of decided that we needed this FTE elsewhere, more so with the court clerk and the records management clerical assistant.
It was more important for the younger people who have kids to have some extra admin help should they have to look after their kids from time to time. So that's part of this thinking.
I would like to say that we would like to keep Will, and it needs to be sustainable. I would like to say that we would like to keep Will, and it might not be sustainable to not have an assistant, and we should rethink that. I'll second that motion.
Noted. We also had a full-time temporary building examiner 2. This was just a 1-year duration position that we had budgeted in, and then we never ended up filling this position just because there wasn't a need for the workload. Then we also had a full-time assistant city engineer and a full-time city engineer. And when both of these positions left the city, we decided to do some restructuring of the engineering department, and we decided to outsource some of the engineering services to a firm. So we wanted to see if that was maybe a better structure for that department and managing our capital projects. And so for next fiscal year, there's going to be no changes in FTE to the budget. So everything we have this year will be what we're having next year. I don't think my clicker worked. Thanks. Some spending priorities of Newberg. A lot of these are similar to what we had last year. So preserving our existing resources, and doing another status quo budget. So what we've told departments were, you're getting the same budget that you got last year, unless you provide a justification for that line item as to why you need more money. And so we'll be going over a lot of those with you when we go through each department's budget on the following budget meetings. But for the most part, everybody needed to stick with what they've been getting because we're trying to keep down our costs and not continue to increase our budget. Obviously, we want to align our spending with council goals, which I'll be going over in a few slides later. Fixing and maintaining roads and sidewalks. This is a big one. As we've learned from the rate review process, we have a lot of roads and streets that need to be fixed. So we've dedicated a lot of our TUF money in our street fund for pavement preservation this coming year, along with the sidewalk crew. Capital outlay rollover. This was a new idea that we had last year, and we're continuing to do our savings plan for this. Did you want to add something? Go for it.
And at the last budget meetings a year ago, we were asked to provide more detail about what we're saving for specifically. And so this year I wrote a new policy with a form that captures the savings plans of each department. So I can reveal to you when we get to that point, line by line, exactly what we're saving for and what year we aim to buy those things.
Yes, so we're trying to keep track of that and make sure that we have enough money saved for these specific projects and items that each department needs. And then, of course, we have debt reduction, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide. So we have a debt reduction plan. So in alignment with Council Goals 6, Objectives 1 and 2, the city has come up with a debt reduction plan to help us pay off some of our debt early in order to eliminate an item off the municipal billing statement. Last year, we created a new ledger line item that was called the Contingency Sinking Fund. And we've been specifically setting aside money into this fund so that it will accumulate in order for us to pay off some of our debt. The first debt that we've identified that we think would be best for us to pay off is this communication tower debt. We'll be able to pay this off early, and the money comes straight out of the general fund. So we were looking at items that we could swap off the municipal billing statement, and it's pretty close to what the revenue is that we get in for the communication officer fee that we get in Fund 16. So when we pay off this debt, we'll be able to move those communication officers to the general fund and hope for it to be a wash, and then remove an item off of the municipal billing statement in return. Some new revenues that we've identified specifically for debt reduction purposes. We have the red light cameras. So that'll be a line item we have specifically in the budget, and we'll go over some of those items in a little bit. We have the school resource officer contract. So we received the first payment of that this fiscal year, which we've put away into the sinking fund. And then we're going to continue putting that money away into the sinking fund because it's identified for debt reduction. And then sale of asset. So we've identified a few properties around the city that we think we might be able to sell and get some money that we can pay off towards debt reduction. And then the balance of the communication tower debt as of the end of this fiscal year is around $1.3 million. So based on our projections, we believe we'll have accumulated enough money from these sets of revenue that we've identified at the beginning of fiscal year 27 to pay off this communication tower debt, and then be able to remove that municipal billing line item for the communication officer fee from that statement.
And the actual hard target is August of 2026,
Yes.
just in the beginning of that financial
Yes.
year.
When you talk about a line item from the municipal bill, you mean the bill that I received?
Yes.
What is the average of that payment? I mean, is it a set fee for everyone, and how much is that?
I forget the exact amount. It's like $2.74. Will's gonna look it up for me.
For next financial year, it will be $32 per year
Thank you.
savings.
There you go.
I just want to put
Yeah,
numbers out there.
yeah.
Thank you.
When we met at the special committee in the fall, you guys had talked about those charging stations as a form of revenue. Just curious.
Yeah.
So we signed on with the fourth organization, which was going to try to get charging stations. And unfortunately, we found out that their proposal, which was a multi-city proposal, was rejected. So we're back to the drawing board on getting some charging stations. There's a company, however, that I've heard about called Blink, and that's the one we're going to be looking at next.
Yeah, that's a great question. So then after this one, this communication officer debt will be, sorry, communication tower debt will be paid off. Our phase 2 of debt reduction, we're going to look at the wastewater debt. This accounts for almost 30% of that wastewater utility rate. So it is a huge one, and we're going to look at somehow to tackle that because that will have a bigger effect on the municipal billing statement that residents receive. Yeah.
Katie, what's that balance right now on the wastewater debt?
If I remember off the top of my head, it's around 20 million. So it's quite a bit.
And the thing about that one is that the objective would be to try to get that one retired a few years early. It's such a large sum of money that it's not going to be the quick, it's like consolidate your credit card thinking you get the small one first, then you move on to the next one. But it's an aspirational goal to reduce everybody's rates in that area by 30% if we can get rid of that line item.
So I just wanted to remind everybody of the 2023 City Council goals. These are still effective for this current budget. And then I wanted to go over just a couple of newer things for the council goals that are tied into the budget. Obviously, we have other things in there, but these are just some newer ones that are happening for this next budget cycle. For goal 1, for creating and maintaining a high level of customer service, the city rolled out a new customer service manual to all departments in this current fiscal year, and some departments are currently working on a customer service survey to help improve the customer service and how they serve the public. For objective 2, to streamline the process for issuing building permits, the Community Development Department is working on implementing OpenGov to replace Trackit. So that's the software we use for issuing building and planning permits. This should offer us a much better payment portal for customers to make it more user-friendly and easier to interface. And of course, it'll be much less headache for staff because the system we're using now is ancient and terrible. So this is a win-win for everybody. For goal 2, identify industrial land to attract employers to encourage family wage jobs. In the professional services budget for planning, we have an urban growth boundary expansion consultant and economic opportunities analysis appeal consultant services budgeted for. For goal 3, ensure Newberg infrastructure is in good repair and supply. For objective 1, the CIP project list for next fiscal year is going to go to council for review on May 6th. That may be something that the budget committee would want to tune in for. On our budget committee meeting on May 7th, we're going to go over the capital projects budgets. So this is a good lead in for it. And then for objective 2, we have the sidewalk crew again that we're expected to hire early FY25. And then we have a heavy focus on pavement preservation work so that we can spend down some of that tough money that we've had in reserves and get some of that work going.
And coming out very soon, there's going to be a survey to help sharpen our pencil on which streets require pavement preservation the most. The survey is going to go out to the Traffic Safety Committee and to council. And I'm also going to ask my amazing officers in patrol to take the survey too. They are the people that drive over our roads the most. And from that, we're going to develop a list of the roads considered by all these parties to be the very worst roads. And those are the ones we're going to attack first.
Yes, I've forgotten about that. Goal 4, enhance community safety. Again, early this current fiscal year, we had just missed the budget for last year, but the city and Newberg School District agreed to a 5-year contract to provide an additional school resource officer. And then for objective 2, The city's been approved for 2 speed and red light camera intersections, which we're hoping to be up and running early next fiscal year. Goal 5, create and maintain a high level of transparency with our residents. For objective 1, we are still working on the website design, and we're hoping that this project will finish early next fiscal year to make it more friendly for our residents and customers when they visit the website. And objective 2, the city recorder is working on implementing a new agenda and meeting management software. Yes. Cheaper and better. Goal 6, implement a careful and prudent fiscal policy. For objective 1, we just discussed the debt reduction plan with the contingency and sinking fund. And then we've identified new sources of revenue for debt reduction specifically. Objective 4, you will be seeing a 3-year financial forecast shortly. Objective 3, the SDC subcommittee met and suggested some changes to the existing rate structure, which council ultimately passed, which will help lower fees for developers. And finally, goal 7, increase land availability for housing. For objective 2, the professional services in the planning budget, we have budgeted for an urban growth boundary expansion consultant. And so now we're going to lead into some of the financial forecast. And so I wanted to go over just some of the upcoming issues just to consider. Some of them are risks, some of them are just things that you want to be aware of when looking at the funds and just the future in general. I've talked about this one before, but rising pension costs, it's always on the top of the list. PERS specifically. So again, just for those of you who aren't familiar, how contribution rates work for PERS, they're made up of 3 components. You've got your investment earnings, you've got your employer contribution rates, and your member contribution rates. And member, which is employee, contribution rates are fixed at 6%. And then the majority of the contributions are made up from the investment earnings. That's about 75%. And we know that those ebb and flow with the stock market and the investments. So when those don't meet the expected rate of return, which for PERS is 6.9%, then the employer is the one who has to make up the difference. And so that's why we constantly see our rates increasing. So, oops, I went backwards. Going along with that, also part of the problem is our unfunded actuarial liability, which in layman's terms, that's basically when our benefits owed are greater than the funds available. A lot of that is made up of retirees and inactive members, 72% to be exact. And most of that is tier 1 retirees. So basically there's not a lot we can do about retirees. For Newberg specific unfunded actuarial liability, we're about 12.1 million. So again, there's not a lot we can do about that. It's just a lot of things affect the UAL. It can be when somebody lives longer than you expect. Various factors like that affect the UAL. So, and this is not a Newberg specific issue. This is every PERS employee issue. Our advisory rates came out for the next biennium, and those are expected to be about a 3% increase, which isn't terrible, but it's also not great. We'll know for sure what those rates are going to be after the actuarial valuation happens this December. Similarly, so Newberg has its own pension plan, which we call NERPS, the Newberg Employee Retirement Plan System. And you can see compared to PERS, the PERS rates that are for tier 1, tier 2, they're around 22.87% compared to the NERPS rates, which are 57.07%. So it's a huge difference that the employer has to pay to have somebody in our own plan, which ultimately is why in 2016 we decided to close the plan. It's extremely expensive for us to maintain our own pension plan. So that is part of that reason. They're very good benefits though for this pension plan. And for this one also, the UAL for this one is 75% retirees and inactive members. And because this one's a closed plan, that one's only just going to get higher. with that. And for this UAL, it's around 13.7 million. So this one actually went down compared to last year. So our investment earnings for NERPS is actually doing a little bit better than what PERS is doing, but it's just relative.
I don't know, this might not be appropriate to answer. Do we have a certain number of employees on the Newberg plan?
We do. Probably about a third of our employees are still on the plan. And most of them are in public works, just because there was a phased approach. Like I think it was 1993, all of the police were phased off of that into PERS. Then at one point, all of management was phased off into PERS. And then I believe most of the public works team was the last to be phased off. So this just happens to affect a lot of our utility rates, unfortunately. And then gas tax revenue and street conditions. So we know with the popularity of electric cars coming on, the gas tax revenue will be negatively affected by that because we don't have people paying at the pump as much anymore. And so, and we also kind of know anyway that the gas tax revenue really isn't covering our street maintenance to begin with, which is why Newberg has the transportation utility fee, because we need something else to kind of supplement to keep our roads up and running. Newberg also just completed a major road project, which was Elliott Road, and that used up considerable street funds to complete this project. So without new revenues identified for street funds, Newberg is kind of going to struggle a little bit with street conditions and pavement preservation. We do luckily have tough money, which does bring in a decent amount of revenue for pavement preservation, but it does come back to the age-old issue of what are they going to do about electric cars? There's been some legislation with this, but it just really hasn't made a lot of traction. So I think eventually they're going to have to figure out how electric cars who are using the roads are going to pay their fair share of road maintenance, but it hasn't happened yet. Yeah.
So even without a lot of electric cars, because they're percentage of the whole population, just the miles per gallon on cars over the last 20 years, nobody's paying their way.
No.
Not even the gas cars anymore. So
Right. That's an excellent point. And that's why it really just hasn't been keeping up with street maintenance in general. Yeah.
And I don't know if it makes any difference, but the registration for an electric car is outrageously high. But I don't know if that money goes. Yeah, I don't-
We're not seeing a dime of it yet. The next issue is obviously the new groundwater treatment plant. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that we've been working on this. We originally planned to start building this fiscal year, but then as we got more and more into it, we discovered costs were a lot greater than we expected. As this meme says, we might need a bigger budget, or we might need to get more creative with our funding so that we can take out hopefully no debt for this. We know that we'll need substantial cash in the future when we do go for this. The project will likely be anywhere between 25 and 40 million, depending on what we end up building. So this is just something to consider when looking at the water fund. We know that we need to start trying to build up our reserves and maintain our reserves. So we're trying to keep our other materials and services and personnel costs down as much as we can so that we can not have to put this on the residents. Yeah.
just one bit of good news. Ours only doubled. Portland's went up by 4 times.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we're
good
much more.
news. Yep, and this is just an infograph on the water treatment plant, just showing that the usage of water is going up and up and up, especially with the more units in town that we get that are being built. And so there is just a great need to build more capacity for our water treatment plant.
The assumptions in the graph are that there will continue to be 200 additional rooftops per year. The assumption will be that there will be one multifamily will begin every year for the next 4 and 5 years. So that's what, this is the water usage that would create based upon the median water usage. So therefore you see that in 2032, we start to get into difficult times.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let me, the last year is 31, 32. when we start to, and by the way, in case anyone's watching this at home and they become very, very panicked, this would mean in the summer months, in peak water use times, we start to not be able to make quite enough. It does not mean for the bulk of the year. It just means your long August months or whatever. So we're aware of this, we're watching this, and this is another factor.
Exactly. On a similar topic, we have other major CIP projects that are on the horizon. We have the wastewater oxidation ditch, which we think will be upwards of $25 million. We're still doing a lot of research into this, whether or not we can do I&I work to maybe not have to do this oxidation ditch. Yeah, so there's a lot of unknowns with that capital project, but it's still something that's possibly on the horizon that we have to address. Did you have something to add on that too?
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
Peggy asked me to enunciate what I&I stands for. So that's the attempt to limit the infiltration of water into the system, which creates more extra water that we have to treat as wastewater. So it's that infiltration, which if we can work on doing more of that, it might stave off the length of time before we have to build another oxidation ditch, which is where the nasty stuff goes to aerobically mix with bacteria. Ugh.
Yeah. So there's a lot of unknowns with that particular capital project, but we know that we have some issues around that, so it's something that's on the horizon potentially. We have the water master plan. We've learned from applying for other federal grants around the water treatment plant that we're ineligible for them because our water master plan is not within 2 years of having it done. So now that we know how to play the game, we probably will update the water master plan before applying for more federal grants for the groundwater treatment plant. And then we also still have to cover the basins at the water plant because we were originally not going to do this because we were going to build a new plant. But now that that's on hold, we still have a state mandate to at least have this done by, I believe, 2027. So we still have to do this project. And then we also still have House Bill 2001 pipe upsizing to complete, which is also state mandated. So we still have a lot of bigger projects on the horizon. So it's something to keep in mind when you're looking at the utility funds that we need to be putting away some of our reserves in order to cash fund these projects in the future. And again, on that same note, for our utility rates, generally capital projects we fund through our utility rates. And this is an infograph of the municipal billing statements across the metro area. And you can see Newberg is on the higher end there. So again, we don't really want to continue putting burden on our citizens and continue to raise the rates for that. So thinking about all of these capital projects, we want to be considerate of our fund balances in each of these utility funds. So again, when we went through the forecast, we were trying to be as conservative as possible with our materials and services and personnel costs in these utility funds. So some common assumptions across all of these funds. So these affect all of the funds. So I didn't want to go through each fund step by step on this one. So COLA, which is cost of living adjustment, we looked at these specifically for each of the groups. So starting with the first one, which is NDPD, like I said before, for our police association, we reached a tentative agreement for a 3-year agreement for a 4% increase each year. When we were looking at this, we looked at national and local recruitments for police officers, which is still extremely difficult. A lot of our neighboring cities are still looking to hire police officers, and we're one of the only fully staffed police departments in Oregon, which is a really big deal. So, and McMinnville has had to hire a recruitment firm to the tune of $5,000 a month to help with recruitment efforts. And many other cities are still offering hiring and referral bonuses just to get officers. And when we did kind of a class and comp comparison to see where we're at with other cities, our police officers are still pretty much in the middle for pay wise. So we wanted to be able to continue to retain our full staffing for the police. So we went ahead and did just a little bit above the inflation in order to try and keep them on track with where we've been going. So that was kind of the justification where we came with the 4%. For our AFSCME members, we're still underway with bargaining, so this isn't set in stone, but this is what we used in the forecast. We used 3% for all 3 years. A lot of this justification was because we looked at how our wages compared to other cities for similar positions, and we saw that we were one of the higher paying cities for a lot of these public works positions. So looking back at a lot of the health benefits that we've given them, we decided that sticking with the inflation rate for 3.3% seemed like that was sufficient to keep up with inflation and where we're at right now, paying compared to other cities. For non-reps, we have 1 year of 4% and then the rest are 3%. That 1 year of 4% was mostly because we did a historical look back on COLAs. And there were several years where non-reps had less or no COLA when the other bargaining units had COLAs. And then when we did the class and comp study, many of our non-rep positions are still far behind other cities. So we thought it was justified to do a one-time little bit bump, and then the rest of it needs to go back to inflationary raises. Some other expenditures. So health insurance, this is a big one. We're gonna have a pretty large jump next year with 10%. I know, this one hurts. A lot of that is due to, so our insurance provider is CIS, so City County Insurance, and they provide us with Regents medical insurance. And so as a lot of you know, Regents and Providence had a dispute this year, and then they were able to settle in order to keep Providence in network. So a lot of that has to do with the large increase that we're looking at. CIS has recently said that they're probably going to go out for an RFP for a medical provider. So we're thinking that when they do that, that might end up making our deductibles a little bit higher in order to keep our costs from going up. Yep, so to keep the rate stable. So that's why we've expected about a 5% and a 5%, because that's generally what our health insurance rates go up by. So that's what we expected in the forecast. Pension costs, like I mentioned before, the PERS advisory rates are going to probably be a 3% hike. And then the NERPs, so next year it's going to be 2% because we had really good investment earnings. So that was really positive. But those rates tend to jump when we have retirements. So we're expecting to have more and more retirements over the next couple of years to have those rates probably hike up about 7%. For the materials and services, again, we're kind of doing a status quo budget. So we've looked at past patterns for spending for each department. And so we're expecting certain line items to go up, like maintenance agreements, but office supplies, we're not expecting any of that to go up. So it was just a simple analysis on a lot of that. For capital outlay, this is just based on their capital rollover plans, which determine their future spending. Yeah.
We have a PERS bond that expires, but it's not in these 3 years, or it is?
It will expire in after this, yes.
Okay, and there's a step up after that?
Yes, so the PERS, that is a good point. The PERS bond is serving as a rate buy down for us. So right now it's probably buying our rates down about 5.5%. And so when that goes away in 27, 28, that is going to make our rates jump up. PERS has said there's 181 entities in our same situation. So it's a known issue, and PERS is trying to work on some sort of solution so that everybody's rates don't hike up. But that is something that is on the horizon that we're looking at figuring out. Hopefully PERS will have a solution though.
And frankly, if PERS does not have a solution at that point for that year, that will mean that we will not be able to do much on COLA that
Yes.
year. We will have to balance out with COLA.
Yep. Just a fact. Yeah. Some other expenditures, so we have inflation and the CPIU. We've expected that to remain around 3% over the next 3 years. And the Federal Reserve has indicated that they're really not in any hurry to slash the interest rates because they're afraid that might spike inflation again. So we're expecting that to very slowly go down, which in turn for our interest income, we're expecting that to have a slight decrease throughout the forecast. And so for the forecast, so we forecasted fiscal years 25, 26, and 27. And the funds that we presented are the general fund, administrative services fund, the street fund, wastewater, water, stormwater, building, the 911 tax fund, the public safety fee fund, and TLT, but revenue only. And so a lot of our reasonings for doing these funds were because they all have staffing, with the exception of TLT. But it's really important to know where your fund balances are when you're paying people out of these funds. So you want to make sure that you're hitting a certain metric and you have decent reserves in there. Also, when you're doing substantial capital projects, you want to make sure that you're on track for paying for those as well. So some specific assumptions we use for the general fund. Looking at property taxes, we took more of a conservative approach. So we assumed the 3% allowed by charter, mostly because we're doing debt reduction and we have all of our new revenues that are going specifically to pay off debt. So we really need that extra 3% for our regular payroll and expenses that we have. Plus, we added between 2 and 3% for additional growth each year due to new developments that are coming on the tax roll. So that is more of a conservative estimate. We could have more, we could have less, but we wanted to, probably more, but we wanted to be a little bit more cautious on that. Franchise fees, those generally increase 5% each year by contract. The state shared revenues, those kind of vary between which ones you're looking at. For the liquor ones specifically, which that's the general state shared revenue, and then the specific liquor ones, we budgeted those at 5% each year because that's typically what we've been seeing. We expected flat rates for marijuana and cigarette taxes just because those have been really tanking and we haven't been getting a lot on those. Community development, we're assuming that to be static to what we received in this fiscal year for all 3 years. Basically because we're expecting planning and permits to kind of slowly start to decline just due to the economy and development that we're expecting here. City contracts, that used to be for the Dundee planning contract, which we canceled mid-fiscal year. This was mostly due to just staffing and time. We just didn't have time to do Dundee's planning anymore. The Dundee Police and Communications contract, this is 5% for all 3 years by contract. Traffic fines. So I reduced this by 50,000 next year and then had a slight increase the following years. This is mostly because they really never hit that dollar amount with citations that I've been budgeting. So I got it to a more realistic number. The school district SRO contract. This is a new line. This is earmarking the 5-year contract that we have with the school district, and this is specifically for debt reduction. We have our photo red light. This is a new line also. This is for, again, the red light. We're anticipating around 250,000 each year that we just really don't know what we're going to get on these. So not the point, but we just really don't know what money is going to come in on this and what type of citations we're going to be earning. So we decided to take more of a conservative approach with this number. And this one also, again, is specifically earmarked for debt reduction. Traffic school, we're budgeting a slight increase because with the new red light cameras, that means more people are eligible for traffic school. Sale of asset, we always have sale of assets just from vehicle sales and whatnot, but again, we've earmarked specific dollar amounts in here for property sales that are for debt reduction. And then of course we have the TLT transfer in, and this is because we've seen tourism continue to grow and continue to go up. And in fiscal year 27, we expect the Fairfield Inn to start earning TLT revenue. So that will be an exciting addition. For the expenses, we have the capital rollover funds, so each department is saving for a specific thing, which we've talked about. Contingency for the general reserves, we want to keep that above $2 million. That's kind of a good point. So we have that in the model for that. And then the contingency sinking fund, we have that growing each year from the new revenues we're anticipating specifically for debt reduction. And we have anticipated that to accumulate enough by August of 26 to pay off that communication tower debt. There we go. So this is where our ending fund balances look to be throughout the forecast. So, and then that blue line there at the bottom is 20% of our operating revenues and ending fund balance, which is a good metric to see where you're at. So you want to keep that number above 20%. So you can see that we stay above 20% through the whole forecast. We do take a little bit of a dip, but honestly, that's because where we're at right now with our fund balance at 35%, that's a lot. And a lot of that is because we've been accumulating money from staffing vacancies. So for several years, we've had a lot of police vacancies, we've had planning vacancies, and so all of that money we've just been accumulating. So now that we're fully staffed, we start to kind of go down and then we start to bottom out with where we're at, which is good. We should be sitting more around the 20 to 25%, which is a good level to be at with reserves. And again, in that last fiscal year, that number is after we pay off that debt and have those 2 officers move into the general fund. Do we have any questions on this before I move on to another fund?
You said 2 officers. You meant the communications?
Yes.
Officers, thank you.
Yes, the 2 dispatchers. Yeah,
Another thing to think about here is now this is with all these very conservative thoughts about new revenue streams. If some of them come in better than anticipated, it'll be an uptick on this chart. Also, these are very high COLA years. We're anticipating that if inflation continues to normalize, COLA will also go down after the end of this cycle. So a slight dip on this projection, but of course it could turn out to be better than that, we hope.
yeah. And again, I don't think the dip is anything bad. It's just because we've had so much money from staffing vacancies built up that it was inevitable we were going to go down once we were fully staffed. So. For the Administrative Services Fund, the main source of revenue here, it gets revenues from all the other funds. We expect that to increase about 5 to 8% each year. That's really based on departmental needs and personnel costs and facility maintenance costs. And then for some of the main expenses here, we have capital outlay in the facilities department. Some of this money for next fiscal year, we've earmarked for the City Hall flood recovery for anything that's non-reimbursable from the insurance. It's bound to happen, so we wanted to make sure we had some money set aside for that. Legal expenses, we have that increasing due to a new contract we have with Miller Nash, and then we're expected to do bargaining again at the end of the forecast in FY27, so that always adds a little bit more to our legal costs. Insurance and PLC claims. Unfortunately, we do expect this to jump up again next year just because we had the flood. Just when our rates were starting to go down, our rates are going to go up again, but that's how it goes. Whenever you use insurance, then your premiums always tend to go up. So we're expecting a slight increase for that also in the future years. And then the last one on there is the bank fees. We've been historically under budgeting this item, which we did correct in a supplemental budget this year. But just because we've had a lot more people use credit cards and auto pay and ACH pay, that it's just increased our internal fees for accepting those types of payments. So we want to make sure that we're capturing all of that revenue and expenses.
Has there been discussion about actually charging people the percentage that the credit card companies charge?
Yeah, that we've had some internal discussion on that. It's hard because most of the fees are related to utility billing. And we already have a tough time recovering some funds from that, getting people to pay, or it's already difficult for citizens to come in and pay by check or whatnot. So we've had thoughts about doing it for permits for like planning and building and possibly even court fines. Yeah, so there's been some discussions about it, but we haven't really made any moves on that yet. So, yeah, I think we'll probably look at that maybe next year and bring some numbers to council to look at that. Yeah, exactly. So for the admin services forecast, it just kind of stays pretty stagnant. I mean, the graph looks a little dramatic, but if you look at the numbers, it's all relatively similar. So our fund balance honestly is pretty stable in this fund when you look at it as a whole. And some of the beginning fund balance there in that first year for FY '24, that could kind of vary depending on when we start work with City Hall, because we have some expenses related to that that could hit either this year or next year. So some of that could fluctuate with that. Moving on to the street fund, for the gas tax revenue, we are expected to have a little bit of an increase next year, so with 2%, but then we're expecting that again to taper off to a flat amount by 27. Our tough revenue, so the rate review committee recently passed for a 17.5% increase for FY '25, then 4% for FY '26, and then we assumed a 4% increase as well for FY '27. And then we also have substantial tough reserves in the fund balance as well. And then for beginning fund balances, for our non-tough money, which is our gas tax money, a lot of that has been used up on projects this year, and we'll probably need several years to recover the non-tough money portion of the street fund before we can do any more projects. Some expenses, we still have the sidewalk crew in there for all 3 years, and they're expected to help make our tough money go a little bit further because they can help with some different aspects of pavement preservation. Contingency assigned for vehicle replacement. We had to unfortunately completely cut this out from all 3 years of the model just from lack of funds. So we won't be able to do any vehicle replacement in the street fund for a while. Street improvements, we also had to reduce this from lack of funds. We still have some budgeted, but it's not quite what we've done in the past. And then pavement preservation for tough, the main focus for the next 3 years is going to be from the tough money, because that's really what we've got to spend. Everything else is, we've got to get our gas tax money back to where we've been. So when you look at the street fund forecast, so this is the combined ending fund balance for both the tough and the gas tax. So the street fund does slightly start to recover, but a lot of this is the tough money. So the regular non-tough, the gas tax money, that really just is going to take a while to recover, to be able to do any sort of major street project in a while, because it's just going to take a while. But overall, the street fund looks okay. So we've got plenty of money to do some pavement preservation. So that's going to be the focus.
So yes, maintenance, no Elliott Road type new projects, basically.
Yes, exactly. No more Elliott roads for a while. No more new road projects for a while. For the wastewater fund, again, for rate review, that they passed a 3.5% increase for FY '25 and '26. And so we assumed the same increase for '27. Other fees, so this accounts for others who use our sewer system for dumping. So like for porta potties and that sort of thing. So we trued that up to what we've been receiving in this fiscal year. And so then we expect that to remain flat. In compost sales, we're expecting that to remain flat over the next 3 years as well. And then debt payments. So we've added the principal and interest to the forecast based on our amortization schedules. Transfers out for capital projects. This is based on our projected 5-year CIP plan for the non-SDC funds that need to come out of the wastewater fund. And then for I&I, this is going to be a focus on maintenance work for the next 3 years for this fund. So with wastewater, it does decline over the next several years, but a lot of this is mostly due to us putting off a lot of projects over the last several years because of COVID. So back when COVID happened, a lot of these big projects got delayed. And so then we just kept accumulating money and just saving it. And now we're finally getting around to doing those projects. So our fund balance is going to start going down a little bit. And the metric that we used for that, for that minimum fund balance target is a little bit different for the utility funds. So you want to have 60 days of operating costs, which is personnel and materials and services, 1 year of debt service. You want to have equipment replacement based on forecasted needs, 5% of annual user fees, and 2% of assessed value to include depreciation. So that you want to make sure that you have all of that combined into your reserve, which is what puts that blue line on there for each of the forecasted years. Yeah. Yeah, so it puts it around 7.5 million, I believe. So we still stay above that in the forecast, but it's, again, something we wanted to make sure that we continue to keep our personnel costs and our other materials and services costs down because, again, we have that oxidation ditch we might have to build. So we want to make sure that we keep as much cash reserves as possible in the fund when we go to think about that. For water, we have the user fees. So rate review passed 5% increase for 25 and 26. And then we assumed a 4% increase for FY27. And then we expect all other revenues to remain flat over the next 3 fiscal years. And then again, for transfers out for capital projects, this is based on the 5-year CIP plan for what we have budgeted for projects over the next 3 years. Personnel and materials and services, again, we're trying to keep this as low as possible because we've got that big groundwater treatment plant that we're hoping to build without having to take out any debt. So we tried to keep that in mind when we were doing this and tried to keep this as low as possible. And then debt service, we have the 2015 refunding bonds that are going to be paid off in FY26, which will also free up some of the water SDC money. And then the effluent reuse loan, which will be paid out of the SDC funds as well. That will be paid off in FY28, which is outside the forecast, but also notable because we're almost done with that debt. So that will be good news. So the water fund you can see is, pretty flat in all honesty, which is also good. And it has the similar metrics that we use for that target ending fund balance as we do with the wastewater. So this is really pretty good when you look at it because we want to make sure that we're preserving that fund balance and we want to make sure it starts to slowly go up because we have to be thinking about saving our fund balance and saving money for the groundwater treatment plant that we're going to need to build. Looking at stormwater, the user fees, the rate review passed the 6.5% increase for FY25 and 26. And then we assumed the same thing for FY27. And then we're assuming all other revenues are going to remain flat over the next 3 years. And then again, the transfers out for capital projects, that's based on the 5-year CIP plan. And then again, for personnel, materials, and services, we're trying to keep those as low as possible. The stormwater has a huge CIP list for the next 5 years. So we want to maintain as much of our reserves as possible so that we can cash fund all these projects. So looking at this one, we do take a little bit of a dip also. But again, that's because we've had a lot of stormwater projects that we've kind of put off since COVID. So we're still staying above our target ending fund balance, and we have a lot of projects on the horizon. So again, we're trying to be as cautious as we can with our other materials and services costs that we have in the future to make sure that we continue to stay above that target fund balance. For the building fund, for building permits, we've trued that up to what we've been receiving in this current fiscal year. And then we expect it to remain flat in the future years because we're expecting a little bit of a decline in the market for building in Newberg. So we're just gonna see where that goes. Yeah.
And in one of our earlier models, we were playing around with this actually going down. But then when we found out that Kalina was committed to doing construction over the next 3 years, and they're looking at 50 or 60 units per year, that would tend to indicate we're probably going to hit that 180 or more rooftops per year. So that's why we assumed flat.
Yep, and same thing with the plumbing permits. We trued it up to what we've been receiving this fiscal year, and then we expect it to remain somewhat flat just to match the building permits. And then our city contracts, which is what we contract out for building inspections, we also expect that to remain flat over the next 3 years. For expenses, personnel, materials, and services, we're trying to keep this status quo. The building fund really has had decent reserves over the last several years, and so they've been expecting this decline. So they've kind of planned for this rainy day. So we're trying to make sure that we have enough reserves in there so that when we're done with the rainy day and we start coming back up, that we'll still have a decent amount of cushion for the staffing that we pay for in here. And of course, the building fund looks fine. So even if there is a decline with revenues, I think that their cushion will be fine. Staffing costs in this one is around 750,000. So as long as we stay above like $1 million in ending fund balance, we should be sufficient for paying for our staff. For the 911 tax revenue, this is part of the state shared revenue formula for having a dispatch center, which we tend to get about a 4.5% increase each year. So that's what we forecasted in the model. And then for expenses, this generally pays for 3 of our dispatchers. And the main goal from this is to help offset the general fund's cost of maintaining a dispatch center. So here you can see, honestly, the fund balance is pretty stagnant to what it's been. So that's good. We keep sufficient reserves in there from that state shared revenue. For the public safety fee fund, so we have 2 sets of revenue here. We have the public safety fee, and that funds 3 police officers. And that fee is paid for on the municipal billing statement. And the resolution links it to the CPIU West. So we forecasted that to be 3% each year in the model. And then for the communication officer fee, that funds 2 communication officers, which is also paid for on the municipal billing statement. And this resolution also links it to the CPIU, which we've also forecasted to be 3%. And then for personnel services, again, for patrol, it pays for 3 police officers. And then for communication, as part of the debt reduction plan we talked about earlier, this communication officer line item will come off the municipal billing statement at the beginning of FY25. And then the results will show those 2 communication officers moving to the general fund. Sorry, what did I say? 27, sorry. Sorry, 27. And here you can see it takes a big dip at the end, but that's only because we don't have that communication officer fee anymore. So that fund balance there just represents the public safety fee ending fund balance from that specific revenue, since that will be the only revenue going into that fund now. So that's why it takes account for that big gap. And then the last one on here is the TLT revenue. So we've trued that up to what we've been receiving this year, and we expect it to continue to increase. So ever since COVID, we had a big downcline. And then ever since we've opened back up from COVID, everything has been starting to increase a lot. So revenues have continued to go up significantly, especially for our hotels. So we're expecting that to go up again next year, and then to be somewhat flat in 26, because we can't just keep going up, can we? And then in 27, the Fairfield Inn will come on the roll. So the TLT, we expect to go up again that year. So, and then for the TLT related to the short-term rentals, We have seen those continue to increase each year. So we're also planning on those to continue to increase, just because they've just become more popular here. And we've gotten better at tracking who's doing it. So just looking at the revenue forecast, it looks like the TLT is going to continue to increase and bring us in good revenue for the general fund. This is the end of the forecast. Does anybody have any questions on any of the funds that I've shown? Yeah, sure. Let's hear them.
So I think something important to bear in mind is at the same time, when every one of our sister cities is talking about adding new fees and charges, we're talking about taking one off. And so we have weathered the storm of this inflation by holding things tight, keeping the same staffing, trying to hold down COLA as much as we can. And that's what you're seeing here. So also on those funds where we're doing a lot of project work, having this new 3-year forecast all the time lets us constantly watch the next 3 years as they come. And if we see that we don't like the way the curve is going, then we do less capital projects. So just so you know, it's not on autopilot, it's a projection.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know too that the forecast is always evolving and it's always changing. With the new information that we get, it's constantly being updated so that we know where we're going. And we always want to know what direction that the city is heading in. But this is giving us a good look at the next 3 years and the good look at what the funds are going to be looking like. And overall, everything is looking above where we need to be, which is good, especially for the general fund. And especially considering that we're paying off debt. Because
have a whole bunch of state mandates stuff.
yeah, exactly. So I just think that's important to note because a lot of places need their new revenue to continue to operate because costs just continue to go up. And so it is really good that we're able to pay off our debt with our new revenue and continue to do well with what we're already having. So I wanted just to talk about the future budget meetings. So we have 3 more scheduled. The agenda for next Tuesday's meeting, we're going to talk about the general fund, the administrative services fund, and then the debt service fund, and the library gift and memorial grant fund. And then for the second meeting on May 7th, we're going to hopefully do a whole public works day. So we're going to talk about capital projects, so Fund 4 and 18, the street, the water, the wastewater, and the stormwater, and then all of the SDC funds related to those. And then on the May 14th meeting, we're going to talk about the other public safety funds, which is funds 3, 13, and 16, the other community development funds, our last miscellaneous funds, so like TLT, governmental capital projects, and ARPA, and then have a general discussion of the budget, approve the budget, and then we'll talk about that 3% property tax that the charter allows, and then discuss the property tax rate and approve that. And then if you guys have any specific questions, if you could send them over, that way we have appropriate staff and appropriate answers prepared for everybody. Of course, you can still ask it at the meeting and we can share all those questions at the meeting, but sometimes it's nice if you have a very in-depth question, we can get those answers for you. And then the budget is going to be released on Friday. We're going to deliver it to everybody again. So be ready to do some budget review. That's it. That's all I've got for everybody. Does anybody have any questions?
I think that you did an amazing job.
Thank you.
I feel like so comforted knowing that you all are thinking through all these things in the way that you are. It just seems so strategic and thoughtful, and I'm grateful as a community member.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll second you. Thank you so much for all your hard work. And I will also reiterate for those who will have access to the budget to really think their questions through and send them ahead of time so that you and your team are ready to respond so that we are able to keep the agenda that you proposed and really approve that on schedule. I'd love to see that happen. And if no other questions, I will go ahead and call it adjourned. Excellent. Okay.
Thank you.